Good morning.
Good morning.
As a fair warning, I have had a cold for most of the week, or at least that's what I'm going to call it. So if I have to pause to take a drink, I apologize on the front end, but my voice has its issues. Also, if you have looked at the back of the bulletin to see where we are this morning, we're in the book of Mark. Don't panic. If you look at the text we're going to cover is Mark chapter 1, verse 1 through Mark chapter 16, verse 20. Don't panic. We're only doing a very broad outline overview. I am not going to exegete the book in one sitting. I want to, but I don't know that it's possible. We will be in this book for at least a year. There are 16 chapters. I can promise you on the front end it will take me at least 2 weeks for every chapter. And when I say at least 2 weeks, we all know what that really means, is that it will take more than 2 weeks. But at bare minimum, 2 weeks for every chapter. And then you've got some Christmas and some Easter that we'll deviate for. And then there will be some that I will wax eloquently for very long about because I really like this gospel.
Yeah.
But we are going to begin our study with an overview, and I'll explain some of that why. But Mark chapter 1, and we're only going to read a few verses on the front end. It'll also be our text for next week. But the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. As it is written in Isaiah the prophet, "Behold, I send my messenger ahead of you. Who will prepare your way? The voice of one crying in the wilderness, make ready the way of the Lord, make his path straight." John the Baptist appeared in the wilderness, preaching a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. And all the country of Judea was going out to him, and all the people of Jerusalem, and they were being baptized by him in the Jordan River, confessing their sins. Father God, we thank you that your gospel is the one that makes us right with you. We thank you that you have allowed us a means of grace. I do not lament that there is only one way to you. I am just very grateful that there is. God, we recognize our undeservingness of it. We recognize that we often falter, as we will see through this gospel, that we falter even as we go. Even when we have your Spirit, we have you as a constant companion and a guide, we still mess it up. So God, I'm very grateful for your grace. Help us to know that your grace is abundant and just always there for us, but help us to not abuse it either. Help us to take to heart Mark's gospel so that we would see that it is about you and that it is a good thing. Help us to love you, help us to follow you, help us to be your disciples and to take up our cross and to follow you. And in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So Mark starts in kind of this notion of the gospel. But if you read the way Mark starts versus the way that Matthew and Luke start, it's very different. Matthew and Luke kind of both start with giving us kind of these nice genealogies and these lead-ins. And it's kind of like when you watch the movies and you start out and you like float into town and you walk through and you see like all of these people that you're going to see for the rest of the movie, and you get this slow introduction. Okay, Mark is more like the war movies where you start in the middle of the battle, where like the scene, like the lights come up and there's an explosion, and and you're like, what are we even doing here? That's Mark, and it's that way through the whole thing. Mark really never stops to catch your breath. Mark is this gospel that just is exhausting to read, and it's by design that way. Mark's audience, and we're going to come back to who Mark is in a minute, but Mark's audience is most likely the Christians in Rome. I think Mark is written late 50s, early 60s AD, just for the record. Not BC, that'd be weird. But in the course of things, Mark is the second, maybe third gospel. I don't think he's the first gospel. there's a growing movement, and when I say growing, I actually mean it's the predominant view, that Mark was the first gospel written. It's a very modern thought. I disagree with it. It has some presuppositions that I can't start with. But essentially they say it because he's short. Like there's not a lot if you look at the size of the gospel. But you only need to be as long as you need to be. A lesson that pastors like myself need to learn. You only need to be as long as you need to be, hearts off. But also, he's rudimentary. Like, he's rough. His Greek isn't that good. But whatever, my English isn't that good. But the other main thing is that Matthew and Luke share a lot of the material from Mark. So it seems that people argue in that, but there are other things that are built in. I do think Mark is at least the second gospel, if not the third, given some of the things that we'll look at. But it ultimately doesn't matter too much. The primacy of Mark is a big deal if you read commentaries. So there, now we've talked about it. I'm going to move on to things that I actually care about. Romans, in the sense of like the people in Rome, not the book, is its target audience. Christians in Rome in the early church days. Not quite in full-blown Nero's persecution, where he is stringing them up. We haven't quite, I don't think. I don't have a Wayback Machine, so I don't have an ability to prove it completely. But I think that Mark is probably written right before the Great Fire of Rome. In the sense of that's when the persecution for Christians really started, because everybody blames Nero. They're all pretty sure that Nero orchestrated the burning of Rome, and Nero needs somebody else to blame because that's a PR nightmare, so we'll blame it on those people. They're weird. Nobody likes the Christians anyways. They become easy scapegoats, and that's when the full-blown persecution starts. But you have pockets of persecution before then. The ancient world would think our movement on social justice is stupid. They didn't have those movements in the ancient world. Now, I'm not commentating on what I think of those. I'm just saying the ancient world, just if you're not strong enough to make it your right, then it's not your right. In a real sense, might makes right in the ancient world. So if you are a passive, in the sense of we're not going to go out and knock down people and fight in the streets, kind of a group, then of course you're easy picking. If you're going to turn the other cheek, we're going to hit you again, is their mentality. So when you have Christians in Rome who are very much of the, we're not looking for a fight, we just want to give you the good news that we know. They become an easy target. They also stand out because Christians in that day, because it cost to be a Christian, were real Christians. Whereas now it's still somewhat culturally acceptable, so we have a lot of people who just fill pews. And they don't look any different than their non-Christian neighbors. So it's not a big deal. Oh, you're a Christian, whatever. But there will come a point in which it will cost us again, and then we will see that there is real Christians again. That is my commentary. But here, and we see that this is most likely that way through several things in the text. One, he uses a lot of Latin borrowed words. Instead of calling it a courtyard, he calls it the proctorium. And he also, in one of my favorite examples of this, he explains a Greek coin, which you would expect, oh, he's going to use like the Jewish equivalent. Nope, he uses the Roman equivalent. And you're like, I see what we're doing. Okay, we're talking to Romans. We're talking to people who are more Latin than they are Jewish. So this is part of why we say that. There's also, Mark is telling a lot of his information he gets from Peter. I'll illustrate that in just a second. And he's walking through a lot of that, and where he's getting it, where he's sitting down with Peter, he is most likely in Rome a little before Peter's death. There's a mention in 1 Peter 5:13 that we'll look at in a minute, but he essentially just calls, and my son, Mark. And it's in that same son in the faith kind of a reference, so now I'll probably skip it later in the notes, but that's okay. This is why I don't do notes, because I don't follow my own notes anyways. Surprise. Squirrels. But Mark is writing to those who are experiencing persecution, who are experiencing havoc. I know that we often have this grandiose movie view sometimes of come to Christ so that your life will be better. And that's true. I mean, obviously Christ makes our life better. We are now righteous. We're saved. We have... But it also makes it at sometimes, in a real sense, a lot more, right? That's a technical term for overwhelming. And if I were going to like shrink down a statement about Mark is the gospel for the overwhelmed. So if you are in life overwhelmed, Mark is a great gospel for us to start, which is also maybe why we're starting it. Just saying. But each one of the Gospels has a different kind of audience that it's originally written to. Matthew is clearly written to Jewish Christians, and it's really reminding them. You know, Luke is written to the outcast. John is written very much to the secular thinkers. I mean, like, he's very detailed. He is building a systematic theology in a very different way than the others. But Mark is, again, written to those who are experiencing persecution, who are experiencing hardship, who are trying to figure out, how does this Jesus thing work in real life? You know, because we've got the good news. We know that we win, but then we go outside, right? Then we dismiss from church, and it's hard. And it makes sense that Mark, also named John Mark, is the guy to write the gospel. Right? This is what I like about John Mark. Let's walk through what we know of John Mark. We know that he is the son of Mary. From Acts chapter 12 is when we first get introduced. You'll remember the story in large. Peter has been arrested. He is put into prison. He begins to recognize, I'm about to die, but the church comes over and says, we're going to pray for him, we're going to pray for him. And they're praying, they have this all-night prayer meeting. And then Peter gets released by an angel. The angel walks him out the door, and he kind of dawns on him, wait, this isn't a dream. I'm actually out of prison. I just walked through the prison, literally. And it's kind of this weird, I don't know how that works. Not one that I'm expecting to be repeated. But he just walks out, and then when he gets out, the angel goes, all right. Okay, that's not an exact biblical quote. But in the moment, like, Peter goes, like, if you could see it on the big screen, it's that Peter then goes, well, I know I'm not going back in there. So, no, where do I go? Oh, I know, I'm going to go to the house of Mary, which happens to be Mark's mother. We're there gathered to pray, and it's the funniest story to me, because he knocks on the door, and this little, servant girl opens and goes, oh, it's the ghost of Peter. Why is the ghost of Peter knocking? It's a ghost, if it's actually a ghost. And then she gets so excited, she runs back in and tells everybody in the middle of their prayer meeting, which, would just be both cool and disturbing, because they're praying for him to be released. And then she comes in and goes, the ghost of Peter is at the door. Wait a minute, our prayers didn't work, but he's at the door. Wait, maybe he's at the door. So then one of them decides we should go open the door. And they open the door and they bring him in. And then they're all excited about it. Answer of prayer, right? Now that's how I want prayer meetings to work, right? We pray about it, we get the answer right there in the manner we want it. Doesn't always work that way. Rarely works that way. But in this particular, so that's where we get introduced to John Mark, that he is the son of the lady's house that the church meets at. Which means she's, if you read the description, and this is kind of nerdy, but is that she's probably wealthy. He has probably come from a certain bit of privilege. To have a big enough room for this, you're going to have some money. It's kind of like cramming people into your living room now. Some of us have a little bit bigger of a living room. It'd be easier than others. And then some people have like that, huge dining room that you can fit like 40 people in, and you're like, And then some people, you're going to just sit down the hall, kind of a thing. It's just how that is. But she's got, so at this point then, what we also see at the, excuse me, also in chapter 12 at about verse 25, Paul and Barnabas take him with them as they go back. It is not the first mission trip proper. It's kind of the famine relief moment. But they take John Mark with them. You can look in Colossians chapter 4 and you'll see that part of that is because Barnabas and John Mark are cousins. That'll come into play, I think, in some other things here in a little bit. But this is, so he goes on a mission trip with Paul and Barnabas. And then the next time when Paul and Barnabas go on their first mission trip, John Mark goes with them again. And this seems like oh wow, this is what we would expect from somebody who grew up literally in the church. It's kind of like Samuel in the Old Testament. He grew up in the temple. John Mark grew up in church. In the most literal sense possible. Excuse me. So while he's there, Paul and Barnabas take him with them. They get part of the way through, and in chapter 13, they take him as a helper, and then by 13:13, he has abandoned them in the middle of their mission trip. It is right after they have ran into a sorcerer who is not exactly pro-Christian as it starts, but as it struggles through, John Mark just abandons them. Now later on, excuse me, later on, second mission trip comes, and Barnabas says to Paul, hey, as we go, let's take John Mark again. I think he's learned his lesson. And Paul goes, no. That guy's a defector. Like the word is what you would call a traitor. That guy, we're not taking him. And if you read the English translation, it's, and they disagreed, and one goes one way, one goes the other. The actual Greek word for their disagree is they have a fight. Like it was a hootenanny kind of a fight. It's a big deal, splitting of ways fight. Which, as we kind of get to know Barnabas is kind of the champion for the underdog. He's the guy who comes by and says, no, Saul really is legitimately a Christian. Don't be afraid of it. And the church goes, no, really? Okay, if you're going to vouch for him, fine. And Barnabas just does a lot of this, let me pull in people who shouldn't be. He's just, son of encouragement is a legitimate name for that guy. And he does the same thing with John Mark. He says, no, I'm gonna vouch for him. Okay, but you're on your own, is Paul's kind of opinion of it. He's going to abandon you. I'm not sinking more resources into somebody who's going to turn back and quit. And as it turns out, apparently Barnabas was right. And we've seen it in the letters of Philemon and in some other places, Mark is asked for by Paul. Paul actually says to Timothy in 2 Timothy, hey, when you come, bring John Mark. He's pretty useful too. And it's this beautiful, the quitter becomes asked for again. The guy you couldn't trust, you can trust again. So if there's anybody who has a legitimate cause to write a gospel to the overwhelmed, it's this guy. Like, it's an appropriate person to write the gospel. Right? Because this is the guy who got overwhelmed with trying to figure out how does Jesus work in the real world. Right? He got away from his mom. He's on his mission trip. And those of you who have traveled away, if you can remember that time where you first got out on your own and you're kind of trying to figure out, and it just sometimes is overwhelming, and it's, I'm going to go home for a hot cooked meal. Just packing up and leaving college, I'm going to go home. And then they make you go back. Something about they invested good money. It's also why I only went 2 hours away to college. But, excuse me. The notion is that this is the gospel for the overwhelmed. This is the gospel for the persecuted, which is part of why it's written in the style that it's written in. Its style is not polished. Because if you're in the middle of it, you don't have time for the soliloquy, right? If you are in the middle of hurting and your life just crumbled and you call me up, you don't want me to start giving you the 4-hour, well, let me illustrate this on the dry erase board and here we go. You know, in this long, drawn-out explanation. You just want to hear me go, it's okay, God's got you. Oh, okay, good. Catch my breath now. And that's essentially Mark's gospel. It is a theology of the cross. Because in the first century, part of what was the elephant in the room, so to speak, is for those who would come in, would often look at the Christian movement and go, I understand that would have an appeal if Christ had won, but he lost. He went to the cross. So the cross is in a lot of ways the pink elephant in the room, the elephant we just don't talk about. But Christianity said, no, we're going to talk about it. And if you look at just the bulk of the material in Mark, one of the beautiful things that you'll notice is that the first 8 chapters are about his miracles and about how he's working in with people and he's doing. He's busy. And I mean, he's busy. Like to the point of it's exhausting to read busy, which is part of the way in which this is supposed to work. But then the next, essential half of the book, it's a little less than half, I think, is just about the cross. I mean, it's an apologetic for the cross. This book has at its core the suffering servant of Jesus Christ, which is an Isaiah reference. By the way. But it is this notion of he is not Christ in spite of his suffering. He is confirmed to be Christ because of his suffering. His power and his suffering go together to validate who he is. And part of the lesson in that, as the overview, is that if you're overwhelmed, if you're at a point where you go, I really love Jesus, but I can't even breathe. I love Jesus, but I can't even figure out if I'm coming or going or if it's north, south. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just here and I'm glad I'm here, but that's how the disciples feel throughout the book of Mark. That's how its readers felt. Even in reading it, you get the, okay, I just got to trust Jesus. Because Mark also has this writing style where he likes to sandwich things in between things that they shouldn't sandwich in between. There's a technical word for that, and I wrote it down. Intercalation. Yeah, go figure. But it's kind of like the story of Jairus' daughter, or Jairus, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So he's going to go heal this little girl who's about to die, who's 13 years old. She's about to die. And then there's the story of the woman with the issue of blood who just touches him, and he stops in the crowd and goes, okay, who touched me? And then he goes back after he deals with that lady, and we'll get to it. We're going to get to it now. He heals her, and she's like, oh, I shouldn't have touched you, I know. And he's all like, cool, I just felt the power go. I just wanted to know who touched me. And the disciples are like, how are we supposed to know? There's a crowd. And Jesus is just like, no. Somebody touched me, and it was a different kind of touch. There was something, so here we go. And then, you're reading it, and you can imagine that even the disciples are like, we're going to go heal this guy's daughter. We don't have time for who touched you. What is the deal? And this is oftentimes, I apologize for the animation, but this is oftentimes how we feel as we do life, right? You're doing life. I know that I'm going to do this. And then all of a sudden there's all of this, and we go, I don't have time for all of this, Jesus. You told me to do this, and all of this is going to take me, around Lily Moon's Pond. I don't know where Lily Moon's Pond is, but anyway, that's what I'm supposed to do. I can't go over there to go over there. And God goes, no, that's cool. I know what I'm doing. Somebody touched me. We're going to stop here. Right? And this is why Jesus gets more done going to the thing than we get done at the thing. But that's a whole nother sermon. We'll get there. But it's this weird, why didn't we just tell one story and then the other? Well, they stylistically do, there's a point for that. But it also enhances the what feeling of the gospel. Because this is a gospel for people who want to be obedient. They want to follow, but they're a mess, right? And this is, I think, very appropriate for a good lot of people in this day and age. We really want to follow Jesus, but then it just gets, what? Like, if somebody were to tell us, well, this is how you follow Jesus, it sounds so simple. It sounds so clean. You just follow the commands. You just do the thing. And we go, awesome, I can do that. And then the thing is crazy. I don't know how else to say it. I'd like to say that, as I've matured in my Christian walk, what I've realized is, the more I mature in my Christian walk, the more I think it's crazy. That's where I actually am. And I'm okay with the crazy. Right? Bless God for the crazy. Because atoning for humanity's sin on the cross, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. All for crazy. In that way. But this is what we have, is that the gospel is wrapped around the work of the cross. It's not that Jesus is God in spite of. It's because of. Mm-hmm. And that's the beauty of this. And it kind of ends, as we look at the ending of the gospel, one of the things that I like about Mark versus the others is that all the other gospels have like the disciples finding Christ in Galilee, and there's that warm, heartwarming scene, and they send them out and they go do the thing afterwards, and we all go, yay! Matter of fact, Luke has a part 2 called the Book of Acts, right? Beauty, yay! All glad about that. Matthew, the Great Commission, yay! Mark has, we're expecting to see Jesus over there, right? He ends with the same way that we find ourselves, right? We know that Jesus is there at the end. Oh, I just hope I get there. Right? And that's the feel of the gospel. And that's part of why I really like the gospel of Mark, is because Mark is driving towards meeting the resurrected Christ. And we see the resurrected Christ in Mark. But we don't get the fullness yet. We're still in the yes, but not yet. We're still getting there. We're still we know he's there. We know. Can't quite touch it just yet, but I'm close. And it's that Mark is giving us, that it's okay. It's okay. If you fall down, get up, dust yourself off, and get back going. Amen. Right? This is the gospel of Mark. Is the disciples got it wrong. A lot of the commentators, if you'll read through, will talk about how Mark really seems like he hates the disciples. He loves the disciples. Peter is his spiritual father. And if you read through here, you'll notice Peter is the dork a lot, right? If anybody gets it wrong in Mark's gospel, it's probably Peter. Peter is really the front runner of getting it wrong. Well, it's not because he hates the guy that led him to Christ. It's because he knows you all think Peter's great. And he is. But he hasn't always been that way, right? And there's a sense of, okay, maybe I'm muddling through it now. But that's what I want to be. How did he get there? Oh, because he muddled through it long enough. Right? There's a non-biblical quote that says, what's the difference between the beginner and the master? The masters failed more times than the beginners began. I really like that quote. And that's the notion here, is that Peter didn't just get selected by Jesus. Okay, you're my disciple. And Peter goes, I suddenly feel more holy. Right? As soon as Jesus pulls Peter, he's boneheaded. He does dumb stuff. And then he gets it. Slowly. Over time. And then he still goes, this is crazy. But I'm in it. Right? And this is how it goes. True discipleship is always going to look like that. It's always going to look like, I'm overwhelmed. This is crazy. I can't find the reason. But God said it, so we're doing it. Yeah. Right? So when the disciples stop and go, we don't know who touched you. When they stop and go, you want us to feed all these people? And Jesus goes, well, yeah. Okay, again, not a direct quote. But the notion is that they have to wrap their mind around that there's something bigger. Amen. That God is not And that is one of the values of reading this, and we're not going to do this, so don't get your hopes up, but he's not even here. So, of going and looking at some of the parts of Revelation where God is just sitting on his throne. Right? That's the beauty of seeing the two of, yeah, it's chaos for us down here sometimes. And it's not because God is like, I got it, okay, good, whew, got through that. I got to tilt it just right. Okay, there we go, whew, got through that one. But it's God going, okay, this is going to happen. Okay, good. Yep. Okay, go get the next thing started. And they're just running the play. Right? It's kind of like if you ever, because there are certain sporting events that I have to do this way. Well, I will see the end and then go back and watch. Right? Because otherwise I'm a mess. Not a lot, because I'm not a huge sports guy. But there are certain like NHL hockey games where I need to see the score at the end, and then I can go back and watch the game. Hockey is my sport, just in case y'all didn't know that. But in the course of things, like but if you know the score, and I know that like my team wins at the end, then it's, okay, I can enjoy the play. Okay, sure, we're down 3 goals in hockey, and nobody comes back 3 goals in hockey. But, oh look, I know we're going to because the final score is 4-3, right? But in the moment, which is Mark's gospel. Mark's gospel is that we're down 3 goals. It's the 3rd period. There's no way. No. I'm looking at the score. It's 4-3 at the end of the game.
Amen. Okay,
and it's that balance that Mark is trying to get us to. But it is a theology of the cross. It is an apology for the cross. And it ends with this expectation of we're going to get to see Jesus. And that's this beauty of it. Because at the end of the day, what is it that we want? We want to see Jesus. Amen. We just, at the end of the day, if Jesus is there, okay, it's worth it. I just need to know you're going to be there. And that's where Mark's gospel kind of tips us over for that. It tips us over to he's going to be there at the end of the day. Yeah, we're going to have to slug through some mud. Yeah, it's going to be overwhelming and we're going to want to quit. But at the end of the day, Jesus is at the end of it. So we just got to get there. And Mark's gospel is for the plotters. Mark's gospel is for the overwhelmed. Mark's gospel is for I love God, but right? That's going to be the title of my book on Mark later. For the disciples of, if I had hair, it'd work better. Earlier this week, I had a little bit more. It was kind of the crazy professor hair going. Only on the sides, not on the top. But, there's a certain bit of longing that has to be there. Right? If we didn't know for sure that Christ was at the end of this journey, I think we'd have all packed up a long time ago. Mm-hmm. We would have all said, I'm going to call it quits, it's just not worth it. But seeing at the end, as we run the race, that at the end of the lane, there's Jesus going, come on, come on. And I mean it like a dad to his kids, right? I've always, there are just sometimes in which I'll just do this and call my children to me. And I love that, one of them will run smack into me. The other one I still have to, no, it's more this way, but because he grew. I don't know what that was about. It kind of makes me sad and happy at this. I don't know. Y'all know what I'm dealing with. And they'll come and and it's the, come on. And it's that, on the other end, the same thing of, I'm just going to run through all of this stuff because that's my dad right there. I'm going there. And nothing else seems to matter. And we read Mark and we go, the path isn't straight in the sense of simple straight. It's just right there. And as long as we're following Jesus, and whatever weird turns he decides, we're going there, but we're going to go over here to get there. Okay. And then we realize, this is why we came all the way out here. Jesus stops to rest, and this lady comes up and says, hey, I need you to heal my children. Okay. There is this, and that's a great story. I'm looking forward to getting to that one, because that one's really fun. Because Jesus argues about, I don't know. I don't know, should I heal your kid? And the lady's like, yes, I'm a dog, but at least dogs get to eat crumbs. And Jesus goes, okay. You know, it's weird, like, what? But it's, again, that's how I feel a lot of times as I follow Christ. Okay, I'm here, just, and God goes, okay. But I love that the gospel has this hope because it doesn't end right. Right? And that's the whole point of that long rabbit trail that got bigger as it went. Is that it doesn't end with, Peter and Jesus at the beach. Right? And I mean that. If you read the ending, all the others, Peter denies Jesus, and then they end up at the beach, and Jesus says, hey, do you love me? Feed my sheep. Hey, do you love me? Feed my sheep. Hey, you love me? Feed my sheep. And Peter goes, oh, okay, we're restored. It doesn't happen in Mark's gospel. Now, I don't mean that to sound like it doesn't happen. It just isn't written in Mark's gospel. Clearly it happened. We have it everywhere else. But it doesn't happen in Mark's gospel because Mark wants us to know that sometimes you're going to fail. But it's the longing that Jesus is still over there that makes us pick ourselves up and follow him again. Not in sola bootstrappus, because when the disciples do their thing, they get it wrong every time. Let's call down thunder. Let's send them away to get bread. Right? Jesus face palms a lot in this gospel. A lot. But it's just beautiful because it's not about what I can muster up. It's about how great God is because he's the God who can do miracles, and the cross, that is the greatest miracle because that's the one that reconciles all of humanity back to God who are willing.
Amen.
Right? That's the beauty of Mark's gospel. If I'm overwhelmed, I just have to go, yeah, okay, good. Jesus, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm with him.
Amen.
Right? That's Mark's gospel. That's our overview. And next week we're going to start walking through it little by little. And we're going to look at the quotation from Isaiah, which is really just, because I can't leave it hanging. It's that thing for me. Is a way of saying the prophets, plural. It's the Torah is the first 5, and all of the prophets are sometimes described as Isaiah, which is why some of your Bibles will just translate it to, as it's said in the prophets. It's a figure of speech that is weird for us, but would have been total normal for them. But it's this beauty of, you can be overwhelmed. God's big enough for your overwhelmedness. Just trust him enough to keep running.
Amen.
Trust him enough to get back up when you fall, because you will. Dust off and get going again. That's the message of Mark. You can fail and still be okay. Just get back up.
Yeah.
Don't stay down. Don't stay wallowing in the dirt. Get up, dust off, get going again. Father God, we thank you very, very much